The Enoch Wars, Chapter 4. He was not. And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Genesis 5:24. The waters went still. He stood at the edge and listened to that stillness for a moment, listening to a sound he didn't know when he would hear again. The chamber was warm. It was always warm this close to the tree. The child was wrapped in a length of material he had taken from the tree itself, cut from a living tendril that grew along the chamber wall over the course of what he estimated 4 centuries. It was thin and pale and warm in his hands, and when he pressed it against the infant, it seemed to know what was needed, pulling close, holding the shape of the child. 365 years he had walked the surface, 14,000 below. The child slept. He had not cried, not once from the moment of the birth in the waters where the light had been and was now gone. Whatever warmth had filled the chamber was gone with it. The child arrived and was quiet, already fed on something the tree provided that had no equivalent anywhere above. The sleep was not ordinary infant sleep. It was deeper than that, a stillness that matched the stillness of the water. He adjusted his grip and looked at the wrapping, not at the child. Not yet. In the fold of the wrapping against the child's chest was a small square of material he prepared before the birth. Something ancient, a scrap of writing material from an era that the archive never catalogued. He wrote on it 2 days ago, sitting in the passage just outside the chamber. 6 words in the language of his childhood, the language of the first people, the language that the elite of the age above used as a private dialect without knowing what they were borrowing. He sat staring at the blank material before he wrote. It wasn't because he didn't know what needed to be said, that was already known for centuries, but because the words felt heavier than he anticipated. Knowing didn't make it any easier. He wrote the words and folded the material twice. Then he placed it inside the wrapping, close to the child's heart. He picked up the child and began to walk. The passage out of the chamber was narrow enough that he had to turn sideways to move through the doorframe. Beyond it, the tunnel opened into the first of the long corridors, cut from the living rock over more time than any human construction project had ever taken, by the slow, patient work of an intelligence older than hands. The walls here were smooth. The low light that lived inside the rock itself gave just enough to walk by. He passed the first of the outer rings, and he didn't look at what guarded it. He never did. What guarded the inner chamber that held the tree would have unmade any other living thing that came this far through the labyrinth of protections that surrounded this level. Looking at the guardian of the tree required an attention he didn't have at this moment. They knew him. The fire that moved through them like blood pulsed once as he passed and then returned to its rhythm, and he continued walking without breaking stride. The passage descended before it climbed. There was a section, perhaps 3 hours into the walk, where the tunnel dropped sharply through a seam in the rock, and the heat from below became genuinely intense, a heat with weight to it, pressure as much as temperature. In the early centuries, this section made him sweat. After 14,000 years sustained by the tree, his body became unrecognizable to those who dwelt on the surface world. He passed through the heat without adjusting his pace. The child didn't stir. He thought about this as he walked. The wrapping held the temperature steady, and the tree's provision kept the sleep unbroken, and the small body in his arms had survived 2 days of tunnel heat and pressure without stirring. The child was at rest. He wondered, before the birth, whether it would be this way, whether the nature of what the child was would show itself in how the child survived the journey. Now he had his answer. He shifted the child against his chest and kept walking. The passage leveled and then began its long eastward run. This was the oldest section of the tunnel, the part that existed before he began adding to it, before the centuries of careful extension that brought the route to where it now ended. Here, the walls were rougher, less smoothed by passage, and the light in the rock was dimmer. The tunnel smelled of deep earth, something old, a smell of heat and sulfur rising from below. He was thinking about the surface. It had been quite some time since he last emerged. He knew approximately how long, not precisely. Time at this depth had a different texture on the surface. It moved at the same rate but felt different. He had been to the surface 7 times in 14,000 years. Each time, the world above was unrecognizable. The last time he went up, the surface world was in the middle of what the Sleeping Brothers archive would later classify as the 4th year of the tribulation. He went back down and didn't go up again. Until now. This walk had been coming for longer than most civilizations lasted. The design of it was clear from a moment he didn't think about often, a moment of clarity from the early centuries at the tree. It was simply there one day, with the weight of truth, and was only now being received. Thousands of years walking toward it, one step at a time. The child in his arms was the reason for every step of that walk. He didn't let himself think past that. The tunnel began to climb. The floor angled upward through volcanic rock that grew warmer as he ascended. The air changed, density entering it, sulfur at the edges, pressure building against his eardrums that would have been painful to anyone else. The storm was close. He had been feeling it for the last several hours as a change in the quality of the air, a charge in it, electromagnetic and something else underneath that. He stopped. The passage widened here into a small natural chamber, the last open space before the final vertical climb to the mouth of the mountain above. He stood in it, holding the child, and didn't move for what might have been several minutes. Then he looked down at the child's face. He hadn't done this yet. He carried the wrapping for 2 days without opening it, and at the birth he took the child quickly and wrapped him before he could let himself look, because he knew, standing in the chamber with the water still settling, that if he looked at the child's face before he was ready, he wouldn't be able to do what he came here to do. He was ready now. He was as ready as he was going to be. He pulled back the edge of the wrapping. The child was dark-haired, eyes closed, with the face of a newborn, still carrying the shape of the waters in the roundness of its cheeks. His gaze lingered. All the time in preparation for this moment, and he still wasn't prepared. He pressed the wrapping closed and picked up his pace toward the top. The mouth of the shaft opened above him in the ceiling of the passage, a rough vertical shaft through 40 meters of volcanic rock, warm to the touch. The walls were slick with mineral deposits that glittered faintly in the charge building through the stone. He climbed this shaft before and knew the handholds. Up with the child against his chest, one hand braced against the wall, moving carefully and without hesitation, and the rock above began to lighten from absolute dark. He emerged. The noise hit him first. Not thunder exactly, or not only thunder, something underneath the thunder that was continuous and enormous. A low pressure building since before he emerged. The lightning moved through the clouds in patterns that were not random. He knew this storm was coming. The light was the color of copper at the edges of the clouds, a deeper red underneath, the mouth of the mountain below glowing with heat. The volcanic rock under his boots was porous and ancient, warm from below. Ash moved through the air in quantities too fine to see individually. He breathed it without difficulty. He looked east toward where the mouth of the mountain opened at the surface of the crater, and he went still. The creature was there. He knew it would be. He had known the mechanics of the release, how the abyss opening would expel rather than send. Knowing this didn't prepare him for the sight of it. It was large, a scale that didn't correspond to the scale of the surface world, the edges of it lost in the storm, and the heat already withdrawing. Returning to the magma from which it had come, its mission was complete. The carrier dissolved back into the medium that produced it. At the crater's edge, where the creature had been, lay a child. He stood in the storm with his own child against his chest and looked at the other one. The other child was small and dark, lying motionless on the edge of where the volcanic rock ended and the heat began. The creature finished its withdrawal behind him and was gone, back into the heat of the rock, as though it had never been. For a moment the mouth of the volcano was quiet. He walked to the crater's edge, stood looking down at the child. He understood this moment was coming for thousands of years. Standing in the moment was different from understanding it. He was simply standing in the storm with his son against his chest, looking at the dark child, feeling the full weight of what the design required of him. He knelt. Slowly he unwrapped his child. The living material from the tree came away warm in his hands, still holding the shape and heat of the infant it carried for 2 days. He set the tree material aside. The child was exposed now to the storm, to the volcanic air, to the electromagnetic charge that moved through everything at this altitude. He was very small without the wrapping, smaller than he seemed inside it. From the fold of material he took the small square with the 6 words on it and tucked it against the child, just inside the edge of the swaddling cloth that remained. The child didn't wake. He placed his child on the crater floor, beside the dark child, with a care that had no adequate description. He stood, picked up the tree wrapping and folded it once, and held it against his side. Then he turned away from the crater and began to walk toward the passage entrance, back toward the opening in the volcano, back toward the dark of the tunnel and the long descent. Behind him, the storm moved. He was 20 steps away when it happened. He felt it before it made a sound, a discharge moving through the volcanic rock beneath the crater floor, upward, concentrated, the storm finding the child lying in the place where the abyss opened, and the charge had not yet fully dissipated. It wasn't a strike from above, it was a strike from below. The lightning in this storm didn't descend from the sky, it rose from the earth. He felt his child receive the full discharge, and he didn't turn around. One step after the other he kept walking, then the next, and then the next, back toward the opening from which he came, back toward the passage, back toward the dark. The storm continued above him. The thunder was continuous. The charge in the rock moved through the soles of his boots and up through him, and he let it pass through without stopping. He reached the vent and went down into the shaft. The noise of the storm receded above him as he descended, muffled first by distance and then by rock, until it was only a vibration in the walls and then only a memory of a vibration, and then nothing. He walked the long way home in the dark, alone. He thought about the face in the wrapping. He gave himself one look and it was done. Then he thought instead about the 6 words, whether they were the right 6, whether they would be found, whether the people who found them would be able to read them, and whether, if they could read them, they would understand what the words were pointing at. He wrote them to be precise enough to be definitive and ambiguous enough to be misread by anyone who arrived at them with the wrong assumption already in place. He thought, is this enough? It has to be. He walked. The warmth of the tree began to grow in the rock around him as he descended, that warmth that lived in the chest rather than on the skin. That warmth he stopped noticing the way you stop noticing your own heartbeat. He noticed it now, the long way down in the dark. He didn't stop. The shaft first, hand over hand down the warm rock, the handholds exactly where he left them. Then the long corridor in reverse, west now, back toward the tree, the walls smooth under his palm. He passed the outer rings. The fire that moved through the guardians like blood pulsed once and returned to its rhythm. The flaming sword turned without looking at him. The chamber was exactly as he left it. The water lay still. He stood at the edge for a moment and listened to the stillness. The tendril from the tree, where his hands cut the wrapping that kept the child warm, had already begun to close. In a week there would be no mark. He sat at the roots. The tree stood in its own light. Below it, deeper than anything the surface world ever mapped, the gates of hell were closed once again. The quiet was the same. The warmth that lived in the chest rather than on the skin was there, the same as always. He sat in the dark, alone, and didn't move. Above him, in the mouth of the volcano, surrounded by the storm, two children lay side by side.